Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerd Dave, and today I'm joined by Dwight at the Big Bearded Nerd. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good, good. You got a very impressive beard there. It's
Yeah, thank
very,
you.
it is beard and very well manicured, unlike this mess on my face.
I try to keep care of it because it gets real. Yeah, it's all over if I don't keep it oiled and brushed. So,
Yeah. Oh, I'm a
yeah,
big fan of the oiling and brushing of the beard.
yeah,
Yeah, I switched to butter recently. I've been
yep,
messing with that, but even that is enough. It is not enough to contain it.
yeah.
I've not been to the barber in like 6 months. I don't know how long it's been. It feels
It's
like
been ten.
forever.
It's been 10 months for me. Yeah, I
Whenever we
yeah.
lock
So,
down, is that I've been to the barber.
right.
so, so for those that aren't familiar with you, Dwight, where can they find you, and what is it that you do?
Yeah, I am the Big Bearded Nerd. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Big Bearded Nerd 21. Also on Twitter at Big Bearded Nerd. I am a live play producer, mini painter, and dungeon master. So I'm part of the Mini Train Domain family. So you may be familiar with Jake over at MTD. He brought me on board this year to be part of that operation, and we run games. And we Jake's a crafter. I'm a mini painter. So yeah, we do all that kind of stuff. So I'm just a nerd
Nice.
in general. So
Live play producer. Did you ever think you'd utter those words like
it's
for RPGs?
no, it's a very weird. It's a very weird thing to, a year ago, I don't think I would have said that I would be doing this, let alone 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I've been working with Jake for about 6 years now, playing games with him and just helping out in general with his operation. And even just a year ago, I don't really think that this was something that was on my radar. It was really around May of this year, working with Jasper's Game Week, that I was like, oh yeah, this is something that's kind of in my wheelhouse. So here we are.
So do you prefer like being in front of the camera or behind the camera?
Uh yes. I think I've just recently started doing more strictly behind the scenes production, and I really enjoy that because one, it doesn't tie me to my desk quite as much. A little bit freer. When you're on camera, you got to be in front of the camera the whole time. When you're producing, you have to be aware of what's going on all the time, but I'm less tied to this chair. And I just kind of I like making this stuff work behind the scenes. Um, so yeah, a little bit of both. I think I'm leaning more towards the production side right now, though. So
Do you ever think there'll actually be careers in that? Like I know like some people have been seriously looking at that. People that have actually they're event producers like in person, like have companies with it and they're trying to figure out how to make it work.
yeah, it's right now there, I'm sure there's a lot of cottage industry type setups necessitated by 2020 COVID. That's how a lot of the stuff that Jake and I have worked on this year's come about, where we've kind of stepped in and helped people out when they're used to running in-person cons and they can't. So how do we do this online? And we just happen to already have a little bit of that, so we've been able to pick up some work on that. But you see a lot more of the big names, Wizards and D&D Beyond, and some of these big names that are starting to do move their con operations online. And as is all things, you'll have your cottage industry absorbed by the big corporate machine at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um, how that plays out when we can go back to doing things live, I don't know. But I think online provides a lot of flexibility and a lot of accessibility that kind of has been overlooked. You couldn't, only so many people got to go to Gen Con or to PAX in a given year. But you move that online, all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people have access to that content. So it'll be interesting to see how that hybrid works out when life returns to some semblance of normality again.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine like cons will start resurfacing towards the end of next year.
Right,
Is I guess if I had to predict, that would be my prediction. The fourth quarter we'll start seeing in person things once again.
right,
I guess
right.
depending on how the vaccine rollouts go.
Yeah, hopefully faster than they're going right now. But We'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see. We'll see what happens. Um,
Yeah.
time will tell. But it would be nice to finally be able to actually see some of my friends in person again.
Right. Yeah. No, and 2020 was a year that I had actually made some plans to attend a couple of conventions.
Yeah.
I've not really been a huge convention attendee in the past. But this was a year where I had made some travel plans to do it, and of course those were shot in the foot. So
I know,
maybe
but
next year we'll see.
I mean, most of my drinking gets done at conventions. My liver is like, do you even hate me anymore? What's going on here?
Right. So yeah,
Yeah. Someday. But
someday.
yeah, but in the meantime, like I guess the silver lining is I feel like we got a lot more people gaming now than we ever
Yeah.
did. Just because there's more people at home, more people are
Mhm.
trying out and using virtual apparatus as opposed to in-person gaming, and which is good. I think that's going to stick too. Once people kind of like break their
Yeah.
initial inertia, going, oh, you know what? I can't make it to game in person, but I can jump in on these online games,
Right.
and they've already
Well,
done it, so it's not a big deal now.
and I think you can hybrid that too for home games. I remember my home game. I think it was the first or second session. One of our players couldn't
Yeah.
play. This was 6 years ago. We Skyped him in, I think, just so he could be there. I think that'll be a lot more common because people will be comfortable with that, especially with I know middle-aged groups and larger groups. It can be really hard to plan around kids and family to get everybody into a session. And oh yeah, we'll just throw a Zoom call up real quick and we'll get these other two guys in that can't make it tonight. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, we did that in Ted's game, and it was kind of terrible.
Hmm.
I
Yeah, it's
didn't
not
like it.
ideal, but
I didn't like it because it was like the person that's getting zoomed in gets stepped on all the time.
oh yeah. Yep.
Uh, and also like there's extra steps to conveying information to them a lot of times. And
Right.
it is a little bit challenging. I mean, hopefully at some point we'll get it like an even better way of doing that.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, I agree. It's far less than ideal, but I'll take it over. I know that our home game had a real problem with we'd go like 4 or 5 months between games because we couldn't
Yeah.
get everybody together. And, we also have an 8-person home game, so that makes it doubly hard.
Oh yeah, that is tough.
Yeah.
I can only make and like so we that's like our table too is like a bigger table. Ted's games have been like 7 to 9
Hmm.
players, and mine are around like 5 or 6. So
Yeah.
it's a bit more manageable. And then when you add like one of those people being Skyped in or zoomed in, it becomes extra challenging to be like, all right, guys, we got to make sure
Yeah, for sure.
that the person being zoomed in, can hear and talk. And because one of the benefits and things that I miss about, I guess, being in person is like we can all be like a-holes and talk over top of each other, and it's not really a problem per se. Not
Right.
like on a Zoom call.
Right. Yeah. No, and it's interesting because I've been playing in online games for like long-term games for a little over 2 years now.
Yeah.
And those first few games, especially when you don't know the people you're playing with, those first few sessions were always super awkward because you're giving everybody plenty of space. So there's these long pauses and down periods. And there's been I've seen a lot of talk lately about playing a couple of sessions offline before you start streaming games
Mhm.
so that you're not broadcasting all of those awkward pauses while you're getting used to each other. And I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see that. I guess if you're
That's
a lifter,
that's actually a really good idea. It's
yeah,
hard in this
yeah,
day and age of like the way streaming is kind of treated as this
hmm,
like production and show, and like it's hard enough to get people together, putting together that cast that you want, and then to also go, oh, and by the way, we're going to practice for 3 weeks first.
right, exactly.
Becomes
So,
another kind of barrier to entry into
hmm,
that. And also too, it's funny like when you're talking about, I was thinking about, even for us with groups that have played together, it's like if someone tends to be a little more reserved and like someone who's not, that just likes to talk, is talking, like I can
right,
see the other person looks like they're going to explode because they want to say something they can't get a word in, and so trying to mitigate like that stuff and being cognizant of everyone at the table.
Right, exactly. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've been playing online since we've been playing online virtually since it was before it was cool. To be honest with you, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you how active you were on Facebook, if you remember, and if you remember the one shot group that really kicked off fairly early in our
Yep.
in Nerdarchy, and even before that, it was kind of like spawned from the RPG Brigade, which
Hmm.
used to be the YouTube RPG Brigade, um, which was like a group that was like just about other content creators making content to talk to each other. It wasn't
Right.
about audiences. It wasn't about subscribers or views. Like someone would do a video about someone and something, and someone else would respond to it, and that's just like how they would
Yeah.
communicate. And then from those people talking and hanging out, a few of them decided to start the one shot group, and it was just like games, and they would just use.
Yep.
I don't know if people remember Google Hangouts used to be a
Google
thing,
Hangouts. Yep. Hmm.
and people would just pop on, and we would just broadcast the game
Yep.
and play.
Yeah, I played a good bit back then. I didn't play as much as I really wanted to because I live out in the middle of nowhere and I had terrible internet service
Mm-hmm.
for a while. And Google Hangouts was buggy to begin with, and if you coupled that with bad internet connections,
Yeah,
I'd get
yeah,
in the game and I'd drop 3 or 4 times, and finally I was just like, I can't do this. So I
yeah.
took a year or two off, and then once I got better internet, I started playing again. But yeah, I was playing too back before streaming was anybody knew what streaming was. It was just Google Hangouts or whatever, just an excuse to get together and play games with people. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it's like it's pre-Critical Role. It was like because
Hmm.
I think Critical Role didn't launch until 2015,
Right.
and then like in 2014, that's when we launched. That's when the One Shot Group was kind of founded, I believe. It was actually like one of the commenters were like, "You guys have been around longer than Critical Role." I'm like, oh. I just assumed they were always there because it just feels like it.
It feels omnipresent, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. And
yeah.
like they're the ones that are like, no, you've been around like a year before them.
Hmm.
Um, so we were fortunate being early to the platform to babble about
Right.
stuff. But yeah, so we've been playing on and off, online, for a while now, and I feel like both have kind of a thing to offer, different things to offer to your gaming experience. And
Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing about the online community is there's so much out there. You can find and just about anything you want. There's something out there. D&D is I'll say as much as I think it can be, it's the hot thing right now as far as streaming goes. That's you can find a game pretty much every night. There's somebody streaming something in that on that platform. But you've got Call of Cthulhu, there's Star Wars, there's um, you know Tales from the Loop. There's all kinds of different systems out there. There's all kinds of Pathfinder. Whatever your thing is, somebody's streaming that out there these days.
so has Twitch
So
finally moved away from just having the Dungeons and Dragons category and opened up to other categories yet, or is it just
yeah,
still Dungeons and Dragons?
it's still not as good as it should be, but it's better. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're looking for something, you can search for. I know we got Jake and I got yelled at one time because we had we were playing a Call of Cthulhu game on there, and we hadn't changed the tag from Dungeons and Dragons to Call of Cthulhu, and somebody
Oh,
came on looking for Dungeons and Dragons and yelled at us because we didn't have the tag right. So
yeah.
so yeah, there's more tags than there used to be for categories. Still not as much as detailed as it probably should be, given the amount of stuff that's out there. I stream a lot of stuff that's not Dungeons and Dragons, and it's the tags are not there for all the stuff that I play. So you just try to get as close as you can.
They should just group them all in one, like other RPGs,
Right.
because
Yep.
like you can pile them all up together, and it still doesn't equal up to the popularity of D&D quite yet.
Right.
It's gonna be a while.
Right.
So Doug wants to know, how has streaming and online play changed how people play tabletop RPGs?
Ooh, that's a good question. I like that one. I think for me, the biggest change that I've seen is a move away from tabletop per se, moving things around the table. And part of that is the move in D&D to 5e away from 4e, but it's less about minis and moving things around the table and mechanics and more about role playing and storytelling. So at least in my experience, yeah, there's still plenty of mechanics out there. But I think when you're not at a table and you're on a computer, for me, I've seen it seems to be more about the storytelling, the collaborative storytelling, and the gaming together versus fighting on a table. That's the biggest change that I've seen.
More narrative driven. Do you think that's going to carry over, like when you go back to playing your in-person game?
Probably not with my home game, because we're straight up 8 murder hobos. So I don't see that changing. But I think to an extent, yes. If you get more comfortable, I think we were talking a little bit about the pre-streaming games, like getting together with groups and streaming offline. I think that was something that I noticed early on was real awkward. But now when I play, I see less and less of that, even when I'm playing with people that are new to my group, because they're used to playing online, so they get a little more comfortable with the cadence of playing online. So I think just the playing in that way is going to carry over. I think we're going to see, and a lot of things in life, you're going to have this before and after hybrid. This is the way we did things before, and this is the way we did things during, and after is going to be a hybrid of the two. And I think that's going to extend to a lot of walks of life, including the way we play our RPGs. So
yeah, it's funny. I played last night. I ran a game for my son, his friend, my nephew that's like 13 or 14, and my wife, and like a lot of it was kind of like improv, and they started going down that murder hobo route, and visiting this hedge wizard, and they started getting kind of obnoxious. I was like, oh no, listen here, you little motherfuckers, I'm shutting this down real quick. Honestly, I'm a very like yes kind of DM, and like go with whatever. But I saw the route that they were going down. I was like, nah, we're not doing this. Right. So I had to kick in their teeth a little bit and be like, oh, you think you're a murder hobo? This guy's robbing you now.
Right. So yeah, no, it'll certainly be interesting to see. I think when you start putting minis on the table, just naturally that's going to change the way you play to a more structured, mechanic-based game. I think it's just natural for us to think of things in that way, because we're kind of geared to think about things as, okay, now I've got this board game in front of me, and I need to think about it in maneuvers and movement. Whereas when that's not in front of you, and my home game, we don't play with minis. We're a theater of the mind home game. So we pull up minis every once in a while for like big set pieces and stuff.
But, that's how we do it as well.
Yeah. So I think that if you can keep it that in that theater of the mind realm, you're more likely to bring in more of these tools from online gaming. But man, as soon as you start putting those minis down, it's just really hard, I think, to not think about, think of it as a game at that point. So
VTTs are the same way too. Once you pull out the map, like I saw, like we were playing with a bunch of young people, and I was a player, someone else was running the game, and when I seen every player just grab their token and go in a different direction, that just broke something in me as a DM. I'm like, why is this happening?
Right. So,
and I was like, oh no. I mean, the advantage of VTTs, I guess, is you can choose to not have maps and stuff out until you absolutely need it. And to a certain extent, your home game can be the same way as well.
Right.
But one of the differences generally at your home game, like that stuff is sitting off to the side someplace. So
right.
It is always on your mind, right? When is the DM breaking out that? What's covered over there? Your minis in front of you, or the minis are in front of the DM screen waiting in the wings to be propelled forth. I always like when I look at like the terrain heavy DMs, in games, I'm like, wow, that looks amazing to play, and I don't know that I'd ever want to run that.
Hmm.
And some folks do like these awesome jobs. I mean, Jake is among one of them, right?
Hmm.
And then we had like the Godfather of Craft, DM Scotty. When
Right.
seeing that stuff, um, and I've always wondered like how that affects the play at the table. Until I actually, although I will say, like DM Scotty is like a master of that.
Yeah.
We actually got a chance to play with him using one of his adventures that he runs often, and like his ability to move through it and use that stuff.
Yep.
It was actually way more immersive than I would have ever thought or given credit to
Yeah.
that style of play.
I'll say the same thing for Jake. Jake runs Tomb of the Mummy Lord, which is he made this fantastic
Yeah.
multi-layered pyramid terrain piece that he runs a one shot off of. That's just it's incredible. And yeah, you have minis there, but he's really great at weaving you into, and he's set up these backstory cards for the pre-gen characters that he runs with, so you can really just get into those characters. And yeah, you're moving around on a board, but you're playing a character the whole time. So
Yeah.
some people are really really good at that. I'm not one of those people, so it's but I love playing for playing with DMs that can do that. So
Yeah, I wonder how rare they are too. Like I just have not
yeah.
experienced it enough. I know like my brother like weaseled his way into this game because he saw like all these like amazing images and it's like,
Hmm.
oh, that's somewhat local to me. And then it turned out to be a terrible game.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
it looked amazing and like they had all the things, but then he got into the game and like this GM is terrible.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
like
Well,
wonder how much of a crutch it becomes.
I would say I think terrain can really be a shortcut to to writing.
Uh,
And DMing is whether you write out long form or you're a bullet point. A good DM's got to have the story written somewhere, even if it's just in their head. I mean, that's how I DM. I have a story like mapped out, but I've stopped writing it down because the more I write it down, the less we do the thing.
yeah, yeah,
So I like to write the idea, but it's mostly in my head, and then I bullet point story beats,
yeah,
and then we
yeah.
can play off of that. I find myself, the minute I start putting a lot of terrain down, it becomes about what are we doing in this moment, and it kind of feels restricting to me. That okay, so I like to have that for a home game. I like to have that kind of hybrid where I've got some terrain for when we get to certain areas, but I can't base my game on terrain because I'm a little too. I'm like I think you said you're a yes man DM. You want to do that? Okay, we're going to go down that road, and I may have planned for us to go through this dungeon today, but now you're going to go hunt chickens over here. So, it to me it's just it's too restrictive, so I have to kind of stay away from it when I'm planning. So,
The last time I used terrain, I was just like, we're gonna do this. Get this one thing planned, and I'm like, well, what's Ted got laying around here, right? Because
Mhm.
Game of Ted's is always great because he's got like all the things, and
Right.
so I like put together this stuff, and they just bottlenecked. They just used the
Hmm.
bottleneck tactic, and like they never really went into the area, explored it, interacted with any of the cool things that were set up. I'm like, screw you guys, never again.
Right. Well, and I think too when you're terrains and dungeons for that matter, anyways, like what's the story purpose for this dungeon?
Yeah,
What is it just a thing that's there? To me, that's far less interesting than a dungeon that has a story to it. And why are these traps here? What is it hiding? Who built it? And being able to figure those things out while you're in it. But so many people just build a dungeon because it looks cool as hell.
yeah, yeah.
And then that's as deep as we get into it. And yeah, I'll pass on that. If that's what you're into, awesome, great. Play the game however you want to play it, but that's
I might
not
be
what
guilty
I'm
of that
into.
the times that I've used it, just because
Yeah.
it's not really been my thing. I mean,
Yeah.
literally in the early days, we used D4s, D6s, and mini Kit Kat bars.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just like, we had a grid that we started using a grid because our one GM was kind of a dick.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and the ogre attacks the wizard. And that was really bad back then, right? We're playing second
Yep.
edition. you're kind of boned at that point.
Yeah.
And we're like, but the wizard's behind the fighter and the paladin. How could he even get to him?
Hmm.
So that's when we started laying out the grid and being like, all right, everyone pick a D4 that you think looks like your character. And we'd
Right.
use like D6s, right? And D6s are great because you have little ones, you got regular size, you got big ones, and
Hmm.
there's an abundance at the table.
Yep.
And then our elevation from there was one Halloween there was a lot of candy left over, and they were like
Hmm.
all like the 2 bar Kit Kats. They were bigger than the minis, and then like that's all of our walls and terrain from there on out. Like we
Right.
used those things for like 5 years.
Right. Yeah. I like, so, and again, our home game, and as I've started playing with my kids this year too, we use, again, one, I'm a mini painter, so I love to pull minis out on the table, for any reason. But using just a battle map with some crudely drawn areas,
Yeah.
just so you can kind of keep an eye on where things are, I think is great. Um, but trying to find that balance where we spend a lot of time not fighting, so I don't have stuff for those situations. But you got a big dungeon crawl, then yeah, let's pull a battle map out to keep track of things. So, or if it's just a quick encounter, just throw the minis out on the table without even a map, just for some quick visualization. So
Yeah, I mean, it's also funny too, like the shift, right? We did a Halloween game for Think Geek, and I was just gonna
hmm.
go completely theater of the mind. And then like players are like pulling out minis, they're like pulling out pieces of paper to draw the dungeon and put the minis on,
Hmm.
which is fine. I mean, like everyone like interacts differently. Yeah, Sci Flourish has like a great like 1 or 2 page like how to run theater of the mind games. And I feel like as the GM, if you just lean it towards the players, it usually works. Like I want to cast Fireball. There's 5 things. Generally I'm like, yeah, you can hit 4 of them, or you can hit 3 of them, unless
Right.
the circumstances uh would favor the players. I'm like, yeah, you get them all. Or I'd be like, oh, you can hit all 5 of them, but you're gonna catch the fighter on the edge there.
Right.
And so I don't get precious with my monsters or my encounters. I don't really care. Like I don't care if it like is too easy for the players this time.
Hmm.
I got a whole book of monsters that I can pull out some monsters that make a harder encounter later.
Right.
Where I feel like DMs sometimes spend way too much time worrying about how much they're challenging their players.
Yeah.
Like
Hmm.
tomorrow they
I
won't care.
Yeah, so, and again, it's funny to me, or it's interesting to me. I look back on my evolution as a DM, and was real mechanic heavy when I started, and I was, I calculate challenge rating and all that stuff,
Yeah.
trying to balance your stuff, and then I was like, man, this is too much math. I don't like math this much. So, and again, what I love about it is the storytelling. So for me, I usually have my little bag of tricks that I keep on hand, and I'm trying to keep encounters balanced for storytelling. And there's times where it's going to be super hard, and times where it's super easy, and I can adjust that, on the fly. But my group also knows that that's what's going to happen with us. I think that's important too, because some people I think would get really, really upset if they found out their DM was, you know, adding a bad guy here, taking one away there, or nerfing an encounter. But for me, it's more about the story. Does the story make sense? Does it make sense that they're getting their butts handed to them right now, and or not? And did I, so then it's less about making sure that you've pre-balanced it properly, and just making sure that it makes sense in the narrative story arc. So yeah.
Yeah, like we just wrapped up a game that we streamed, and really like the players are like, okay, they did the thing they needed to do, then they ran away. And I was like, cool, like I'm not gonna worry about like, well, what is the bad guy doing at this point? Is it pursuing them? We kind of
Mhm.
just went into like, oh, the objective is completed, and we kind of went into like a narrative wrap.
Right.
Because like I find like that stuff doesn't interest me as much as it used to. Like
Hmm.
I've been in the game where the big bad is defeated, right? But like now we were gonna spend 5 rounds mopping up the
Yeah.
minions. It's
Yeah.
like, come on, really? Why are we doing this? What is the
Yeah.
point of it? Like, it's a foregone conclusion for one, right? So it's not
Yep.
all that interesting or fun.
Hmm.
Um, and two, it's just like so time consuming and tedious.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I,
Yeah.
I I much rather just hand wave stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm much more into that now as well. So I see there's a comment in chat here from Doug that I like. It says I like when players are challenged as people rather than warriors, whatever side of the screen I'm on. I really like that. Again, to me, that gets back to the narrative aspect of gaming. We Monday nights I play on Mini Train Domain. We do all the glitters. I DM that game, and it's a Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which is a giant dungeon crawl. We haven't actually gotten into Undermountain yet, but we had our last session was one of my favorite sessions I've ever DM'd. Period. And we had no combat at all in that session. It was all role play. It was all interactions between characters, and it was not something. It was totally organic with the players. A conflict arose in the middle of the session, and the players role played it, and it didn't require any dice rolling. They just role played their characters through this conflict that was an interpersonal conflict that they had, and it was a situation where they were challenged on a personal level by narrative elements that had occurred. Had nothing to do with swinging swords. It had nothing to do with roles. It was just we're going to get through this encounter right now. And it was probably 20 or 30 minutes of gameplay that they're acting this out. And I just kind of sat back. I'm like, hey, all right, cool. That's to me, my favorite DM moments tend to be the ones that are the easiest for me, where something has just set up and the players run with it. And I just sit there and don't have to really get too involved.
I 100% agree. Like, I don't know where the quote originated from, but one of my favorites that I brought over from other interests is, I have two ears and one mouth, so I should listen twice as often as I
Right?
speak, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a super valuable tool to the GM. And like, even like that session I was talking about, we ended a certain way, and like I kind of was leaning towards that ending.
Hmm.
And then a player is like, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if this happened?" And it was exactly what I was going to do. I was like, "Oh, should I change it now?" And I've also seen it come up in other games where the DM is asking, "He's like, should I change it because now the player knows, or they think they know?" I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? No. And then I took my own advice. I'm like, no, just let them guess it. Like that's fine.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's an Easter egg for them, and and sometimes, to be honest with you, I'll make those changes just because the player said it, and they're like, yeah, so that's a great
Yep.
idea. That was way better than what I was thinking. Let's do that.
Yep. Yep. I ran a Call of Cthulhu game just recently that was a large portion of the conflict came from things that players had said. Oh, you don't like, and again, Call of Cthulhu is so based on horror, and the game that I was running was based on nightmares.
Yeah.
So anytime a player mentioned anything, whether it was the player or the player's character mentioned anything they were afraid of, that got written down, and it showed
Yeah.
up later on. And yeah, so I think half of being a large part of being a good DM is having good players, for one, that you and understanding them too. So one group
Yeah.
will play very different from another.
You can have a good session with a mediocre DM and bad system with a bunch of good players, right?
Yep. Hmm.
But you can't have a good session if you don't have good players, no matter what else is going on.
Right. Exactly. I've seen that. I've seen some of the best DMs run some just absolute snooze fest games because and it's like I can sit there and watch. Like I've seen this online where you're watching and you're like, this should be a great story. This I can
Yeah.
see where this DM is trying to do, but these players are just not. They're not picking up on the cues. They're not role playing together. They're not going. They're not playing these characters within the story. And I think that's a thing a lot of players get mired down in is they play the player that's in their head, regardless of what's happening. They play the vision of that player in their head. And like anything, a player, a character, a human, a being should change and be changed by what's going on around them. But so many players don't. They're like, nope, this is my barbarian. He's pissed all the time because of these reasons or whatever it is, and they never get outside that mindset, and it really hurts storytelling, I think.
Yeah, and some archetypes are just less interesting, especially
Yeah.
if you're not good at portraying them, and there's an art to it. Like,
Hmm.
you know, there was a game, and there was like two characters who were trying to play this like Strider type, right? And I'm like, no, that's a terrible
Yeah.
choice, right? Because
Right.
it's like you can't have like a group full of dark brooding characters which don't tend to role play with each other
Hmm.
as they get portrayed in these games, right? Someone that's really good at storytelling and role playing might be able to pull it off and capture that feel and bring it into the game in a way that's meaningful and interacts. But I feel like most players aren't going to do that.
Right.
And it's also
Right.
okay at your home table where it doesn't matter so much. But
Exactly.
if you're streaming
Exactly.
it as entertainment, then it does kind of matter.
Well, and I think that gets back to, you know, when you talk about streaming's not just throwing a game up on. Streaming is entertainment. If you want people to watch, it needs to be watchable. And my home game is probably not watchable. One, I wouldn't publish my home game anyways because it's a home game. And a group of 9 middle-aged men doing what middle-aged men do when they get together with beer is not something I'm going to put up on for public consumption. But it's not that game would I don't think that game would be entertaining just because of the way that we play. When you're putting stuff up there if you want people to watch, you need to have something that people will either want to visually look at or listen to. And so much of what is up there is like, oh, we're just going to throw this game up there because we have fun with it.
Yeah.
And it's not entertaining to consume. So
Yeah, guilty as charged. The early days we did a lot of that. We would record our games and just throw them up, and
mm-hmm.
and we did it for a while. And I'm like, why are people watching? This is terrible. And
Yeah.
and then it's even if it wasn't necessarily from the game perspective, like there's definitely some good moments in there, but those games were kind of long, like 4
Mhm.
hours at least, and
Yep.
they were shot terribly, like camera on one end and
Yep.
long view, mic in the middle of the table. We've had rampaging toddlers go across the table.
Yep.
So, and it's like, but people would watch them. Like we have a few that have quite a few decent amount of views on them. I'm like, why? Like I was totally baffled. I still am. And then, and it was kind of just our home games. And then we got to, and also it's like, did someone say something that has to go? We have to go back and edit out now.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And then we just got to a point. It's like, do we really want to keep doing this? And like Ted had even brought up like, we could totally do like the intros like Critical Role would do. And I'm like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Our videos look shitty after that. It would be like so depressing. You're right. We could probably put together like these cool intros and then it'd be shit afterwards.
Right.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that to people or ourselves? And then so we just made the decision. It's like, you know what? We're just going to keep enjoying our home games. And if we do any stream games, they'll just be specifically for that.
Right.
Because they're just two different things, and both are good, right?
Right.
For different reasons.
Exactly. And I like to bring my home game players onto my streams, but not all at once, because I know what'll happen if I get all of them on the table at once. You lose control over it. But they're all talented role players, so I love to get them into games. But yeah, it's so much of what you. I know that like Jake and I we really try to concentrate on production value and what we're doing. We try to steer away from calling them, like, we don't like the term cast for, these are games. We're playing games with players and people, but we're still cognizant of the production value of it. I like to try to keep my games 2.5 to 3 hours because, one, I have a bad back. I don't like sitting in this chair for too long. But two, I think that's about the extent of when a game starts to peter out. And a home game, you can go sit around the barbecue and take a pizza break or whatever, and keep playing all night. No big deal. But when you're streaming something, you lose momentum after a certain period of time. And so trying to keep those games shorter and punchier, I think, helps from an
Yeah, I
entertainment
mean,
standpoint. So
we did Saber Dice for like 2 years. And I actually consider that was a fairly successful endeavor into streaming.
mhm.
I just did, it was just, it wasn't really, I don't find it sustainable. It wasn't
Yeah.
sustainable for one. And two, like, yeah, like as far as duration, like 2.5 hours is about the maximum. Because right
Mhm.
at the 2 hour mark, you just watch and people stop. You can see where people stop
Yep.
watching, right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
like, there's no point in going beyond that. I mean, unless you're Critical Role, like then you can do
Right.
that. So knowing the audience and what they want is super helpful.
That's a good point, because Jake and I, we handle the production side for Jasper's Game Week, which is a week-long charity streaming event in May. And we were recently sat down and went through the numbers for that. And you watch those numbers just like this, and you hit that every night we had our keystone game, and those were the games that you had usually some sort of celebrity, either player or DM. They were the big games we expected to see the biggest audiences, and that played out. But you're right around that somewhere in that the 2 to 3 hour range, you would watch the numbers kind of hit, level off, and then fall.
It's like a cliff.
And that right. So yeah, it's one is time of day. You get too late, people are not going to be on. But yeah, it's not something that people are going to sit and watch. There's a reason that movies are 2 hours or less for the most part, unless it's Lord of the Rings extended edition. But I think 2 to 3 hour range is the sweet spot for me.
Yeah. And so that was a lesson that that we kind of learned pretty quick. And also too, like, and then like from like you mentioned, from the player standpoint, it's like streaming is different, especially when you're streaming for an audience, in the sense that like you have to be on, right? Like you said, you're like, we don't like on that cast, but at the end of the day, you kind of are, right? You are like
Right.
you're entertainers at that point. And I've definitely taken things away from that. Like, I totally hate like the beginning of the campaign where it's like, here's everybody, here's their character, blah blah blah. I don't do that, right? Like when I start my campaigns, we just start playing, and it's going to be like media res right into the action, and then I'll flashback things to like kind of get into the characters a little bit, right, after something exciting has already happened, and then at some point, then we'll introduce the actual players.
Yeah.
And I try and do that. And then every time I end a session, if I'm streaming, I want to end it on something just happened or is about to happen.
Right.
They're just good storytelling elements.
Yeah, I love if you watch any of the games that I run, you'll know, and this comes, I think, from being a writer, learning that cliffhanger. You got to leave them wanting to turn the page to read that next chapter.
Yeah.
And so having something, and I do it for breaks. We take we stream usually 2.5 to 3 hours. We'll take a break about an hour and a half in, and I love to leave a little cliffhanger on that break, and a big cliffhanger at the end. So my players are keyed in for what's going to happen next, but anybody that's watching is like, oh, now I got to come back next Monday to see what's going on here. So,
I also have like another reason I do it.
Yeah.
So like I kind of think about a session and I have some ideas where it's going to go. I might write down a couple things, but like I'm not like super detailed. A lot of times, based on what's happened during the session, I just make something up at the end, and I don't actually know where it's going.
Yep.
So like I'm like, and if you time it right, then it's like, okay, now I have a week to figure this out.
That was I did the Call of Cthulhu game on that we ran for on Jake's channel, and it was a monthly game, and I used that a lot because I had a month to figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna throw this thing, and I didn't tell them that I was doing that until we were done with the story arc. But there was so much of that. It's like I had so little written. I had the big picture written, but so much of the details of what happened between the start and the end of that campaign was just based on what's going on, and it was improv on the fly. And then you got to figure out. I got 4 weeks to figure out what that means. So But yeah,
And
I,
honestly, with a good group of players, like you don't need a lot of stuff, right? Because
yeah. Hmm.
they're just gonna do stuff, and I like it when I can be a reactive GM, right?
Yep.
Um, and I've had a couple groups where that works really easily, and I'll like go, okay, like if you're playing a 2 hour, 3 hour session, here are some things you need to eat up time to throw in there. But the
Hmm.
rest of it is just me going, okay, here's a scene. What are you guys going to do? And then they will probably lead me to the next scene
Yep.
and
Hmm.
what's going on. So generally, it's going to be things that I would have never thought of anyways.
Right.
So spending all that time pre-creating it isn't super helpful. So like for the last game that we ran, I just did like a lot of sandboxy stuff and like
Hmm.
here's 3 plots. Oh, here's a thing that happened. We got a fourth plot. And let me see what rabbit holes they run down.
Right.
And then like, oh, okay, well I have this resource I can use for that.
Right.
Instead of like writing out the adventure. Like I had broad sweeping strokes of like this is the arc, based on what they decided in session 0 and going in,
Hmm.
but then like is very open for changing things.
Yeah. Yep. No, I find, again, when it comes to DMing, my best writers tend to be my players. So I have a big picture idea, but so much of the story is told in those details, in the moment to moment details, and a lot of that comes from what they come up with, and what they hint at, what they say, what their backstories are. I love to ask for a detailed backstory so I can try to weave that stuff in. And I've had players reach out and say, "Hey, I'd really like to explore this part of my character somehow." Okay, so how are we going to work that in? And then let that dictate where your story goes. It makes it real interesting for streaming. I think home games, it's a whole lot easier because there's the time constraints aren't there.
Yeah.
We're going to get together, we're going to play, and then we're going to get together. And if this takes us 10 years to get through this story, then so be it. When you're streaming, I got 2.5 hours once a week or every other week or once a month to tell this story. So how do I walk that tightrope between letting things go where they're supposed to go, or letting them go where they want to go organically, and railroading to the story beats that we're trying to hit? And a lot of times those games, especially if you're running like a one shot or a short shot where you're running you want to get it done in 2 or 3 sessions, you've got to hit those story beats in a certain amount of time. So
I will say, like, we've kind of taken away from what we've learned from doing stream games where everything's kind of confined to seasons
hmm.
and introduced that into our own games because we've always had the problems of never finishing games,
Yeah.
never having like a completion in an arc and being like, oh, we have time to do this. But the truth of the matter is someone else will be like, I want a GM. Or the DM would be
Hmm.
like, oh, I need a break. And someone else GM, we'll come back to this. And like
Right.
we never come back to that. So by going and in our session 0 going, I'm going to run 6 sessions. I'm going to run 12 sessions, or we agree
Hmm.
as a group. It does kind of like focus back on those constraints. It makes it a little bit harder to get player stuff in sometimes.
Hmm.
But what it has done is like we play games to kind of the end, whatever
Yeah.
whatever
Yep.
that is, and like the beautiful thing about that is like, oh, we're only going to do 12 sessions. At the end of 12 sessions, you can always sign on for another 12 or do another 6 or whatever you
Yeah.
think you want to do.
That's a good idea. I may have to bring that up with our home group if we ever get together again, because we've been playing Out of the Abyss since it was published, and part of that is just it's been impossible to get together. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's
But that
I
also
like
works
that
if
idea.
your group is like doing the same thing. Like, so me and Ted have game
Yeah.
together for like 20 years, right? And my brother has been in and out of that group. Our buddy Mark came in later, and he's been with us for a long time. Um, but like we've got so many dead end campaigns,
Hmm.
that we're just like, ugh, tired of these. It wasn't until we kind of ran like we decided we were going to do these, you know, first the 20th level games. We alternated GMs,
Hmm.
weren't running every week. Playing like once a month. It took a long time, but we actually finally did it, and then we kind of distilled that down to like, okay, well, what if we set these shorter term goals and we're able to do that. So at this point, Ted's run through a couple campaigns that way,
Hmm.
and like we ended one, and most of the group is like, I'm done with that character. I want to do something different. And a couple of us was like, no, I still want to play my other character. So we just kind of like picked up the new game where we had new players and old
Yep.
players, or not old players, but characters, and they were kind of like mixed together. So there was some like completion, and we're probably coming up on another one of them. So it's like figuring out what works for your group
Yeah.
and experimenting.
And it's going to be different from group to group and game to game. We see that online. One group works really well together. Our Call of Cthulhu game started off as we were going to run a one shot that wound up being, I think, 5 sessions by the time, because we just dove into this story, and then we're like, we really enjoy playing with this group. Let's come back, and that's how I started running a game for that same group, and now we're going on a year playing every month with that group. So
Yeah. So I mean, so part of our session zero now is always like, okay, we discuss like how long is this game intended to go on,
right.
and I think that like helps the DM too, right? Like when there's an
Hmm.
end in sight, because DM burnout's a real thing.
Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
you feel like you're on this hamster wheel that never going to end, and it's not that you don't enjoy the game, but at the same time, it's like especially if you're in a situation where it's always the same person DMing.
Right. That I went through that with our home game, because I DM'd that group for a couple of years, and I was like, I kind of want to play.
Yeah.
I want to be a player. And we figured out how to make that work, where we switched DMs, and how did we work that character into the game. But yeah, it's absolutely a real thing. And yeah, you can certainly get into that kind of, almost like you don't want to play, because you're like, oh well, we're only in chapter 4 of 20 chapters or whatever,
Yeah.
and it took us this long to get here, and I'm never going to get out of this chair because we've still got to get through all of this. But yeah, I'm really liking that idea of trying to focus the home game into smaller sessions. So
And
yeah.
then, so I guess the other thing we do is like, I mean, it really slow burns your games, but
Hmm.
like, we'll run 3 Saturdays out of 4 or 5, whatever the month ends up being. And it'll be like, I'll run a game, Ted will run a game, and then we'll get like another GM to run a game. Now, that being said, we are kind of spoiled because via Nerdarchy, it really has kind of like really expanded our gaming circles.
Hmm.
So like they're even like different groups for the most part.
Right.
Um, so we kind of weekly game. They're just all different games,
Right. Hmm.
and they're just monthly. But that worked in several instances. For one, it's easier for people to commit to once a month,
Hmm.
and they're like, we set it up, and like this is a scheduled thing, and it's like Ted runs the second Saturday. I've got the third, and we have another GM that runs the fourth for us. So
Hmm.
like I feel like it's something people could probably replicate online. But the other thing was, it's not really because we're Nerdarchy that we're able to do that. It's because by immersing ourselves in Nerdarchy, it drove us to the places where more gamers were, and that's what actually expanded our
Right.
our circle.
Right.
We had this reason to keep going out and like exploring these places, and when we did so, we made friends and connected with other gamers. So
Yeah.
like that's another part of it.
Absolutely.
And that's also in the before time. So
Yeah, but and the ability to make and stay connected with friends today
yeah,
is so much easier than it was 20 or 30 years ago, because of the internet. Whether you're talking about now in COVID, where we're all doing it online anyways, or in the before times when you would go to cons or whatever and you'd meet people, you'd go home and you'd stay connected on Facebook, or it's so easy, so much easier to stay connected with those people. And you can game online, you can jump on Google Hangouts back in the day, or Zoom or Discord today, and continue to stay connected with those people. I know 3 or 4 times as many people that live on the far side of the country from me, compared to the people that I play these games with here and where I live. And I game with them more often than I game with my home game, especially now that we can't actually get together.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Also, like, I mean, I've been in games where we've got like people from like four different continents at the same time,
Right?
which is
Uh-huh.
kind of cool. And I've gamed with someone from every continent but one, and I'm just looking for that special penguin that's
Right.
down to throw some funny shaped dice.
Yeah. I still remember, I think it was the first game I streamed with Jake. We played a Harbinger game, and there was a lady there from Eastern Europe, and she was staying up till like 4 in the morning her time
Oh
or
yeah,
something
yeah.
like that to play in that game. And I was like, man, that's kind of cool that we can do that kind of thing now. So
Yeah, I've definitely seen that a little bit, like because Australia can be a little tough
mm-hmm.
as well.
Yep.
And we've had people on here that have been from like New Zealand and Australia, and it's like
Right.
the middle of the night when it's noon here. So
Right. Exactly. So
super appreciate those folks.
yeah.
And like we used to, so we were doing these like a year ago, not a year, probably a year ago, 3 years ago, on the primary channel, and it was always so cool. Like we'd see all the different people that would kind of like hang out in the chat from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you'd get like three people from Sweden. I'm like, are you guys together watching? Like,
Right.
it's so weird in a good way.
Right.
In a good way.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. So, yeah.
That, and that's one of the benefits of gaming online. That and
Yeah.
not having to wear pants.
No, the also great. So I like to just it's nice. I have my big setup here. I've got 3 monitors. I have all of my information here. I'm a tech nerd. I love when I play home game. I like to have my pen and paper, but I like the ability to pull up D&D Beyond or whatever resources I have here. So online gaming, I really love that because it's all right here at my fingertips. I still have my real life dice that I roll with. I prefer to use those over dice rollers, but
Just
having
wait,
all
man.
that,
D&D Beyond, they're gonna have dice that have Bluetooth in them, and you're gonna roll real dice,
oh man,
and they're gonna show up on your screen.
give me that. That's the hybrid model that I need right there. So
Yeah, that'd be super cool.
all
Do you
right.
find it harder to run games that aren't supported digitally?
No, not really. So I mean, most of the games that I run have, I mean, maybe when you, if you say pretty much everything has some sort of digital support, whether it's
Yeah.
a online PDF or whatever. But most of what I run Call of Cthulhu, I run Mecha Hack from Absolute Tabletop, I run Star Wars. Star Wars is the only one that actually has a digital tool for like character creation and stuff. And that's a privately developed one that not everybody knows about. But those games, again, I have
You
a
got to
bunch
keep
of
that a
monitors up
secret, or
here.
the mass is going to show up and mess you up.
Exactly. So, but I have all the information up on my screen here. I have, like, when I run Mecha Hack, I'll have the PDF up on my screen and I can just control F search for stuff,
Yeah.
or I've got the book that I'm flipping through. So I don't have a problem with that. There are times where I'm like, yeah, it would be nice if I could just pull up my, Call of Cthulhu character in D&D Beyond and do some of the things that I can do there. But
D&D Beyond
yeah,
has me so spoiled. I'm like,
yeah,
does
yep.
the system even have digital tools? Like, uh,
Right.
Path Builder is a really great app for
Mhm.
character management and having characters, but it's I feel like because I especially the way I run like D&D
Yeah.
Beyond makes it so easy for me because I can just have multiple tabs open to what I
Yep.
need, and I just
Mhm.
flip through them. I've done the same thing. I'll do the same thing with PDFs. I do
Yeah.
that as well, but
Not
it's not quite as good as the database.
D&D Beyond is the bar right now as far as that goes. I love being able to just hover over a hyperlink, click on the
Yeah,
hyperlink, and go to the monster stats. Or, I was running a dungeon crawl a couple weeks ago, and so I had my information. I have my information in I use OneNote, Microsoft
yeah,
OneNote, to kind of collate everything, and I had hyperlinks in there so I could go to the traps, and it would just link right to where I needed to be in D&D Beyond and read what I needed to read. And then it's so easy to quick reference stuff. I can set up, it's easy to make encounters. That's one of my favorite things to use. I just have a generic encounter set up with my players loaded into it, and I can quick add whatever monsters I need behind the scenes in the matter of 15 to 20 seconds. I can have that encounter up and running,
yeah.
and by the time they're done rolling initiative, I have it set up in the system, and it's so much easier to track that way. So yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
Doug in Mini Train Domain, Jake had a little bit of a discussion. Jake's like, or Doug's like, I want to see a true digital tabletop RPG.
Hmm.
Um, Jake is like, isn't that Burn Bright? So yeah, and then Doug brings up the point that's tied to Roll20, and Roll20 itself has a much larger
Hmm.
learning curve to using it. Man, my favorite thing is Beyond 20, so that I can
Yeah,
use Roll20 as a player and never learn a thing about using Roll20 as a player.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, and like Roll20 and Astral, Fantasy Grounds, they're all great,
Hmm.
but they do come with a bit of a learning curve. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
when I play online a lot of times, even like in a game last night, I was like, Google ice cave map, and I'm like, here, and like Zoom has tools you can draw on the map with, right?
Right.
So I'm like,
Hmm.
here's the thing over here, and here's this there, and and just so they have a bit of a reference, and then it's kind of like theater of the mind.
Right.
Or I'll use Dungeon Fog, and if I'm gonna
Hmm.
make a map, and I'll make it over there, and they have the Fog of War, and I'll kind of just use that as a
Hmm.
very low grade virtual TTT.
Yeah. No, I really like I like Roll20. I'm starting to learn it a little bit. We run our Star Wars game. I actually play in that game. We run out of there for player character tracking and dice rolling, because those Fantasy Flight games, Star Wars dice mechanics are super complicated.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just nice to have it's nice because our character sheets are loaded in, so all we got to do is click on the stat we want to roll, and it tells
Yeah.
us what our result is. I'm like, okay, cool, I don't have to do much thinking or calculating there. But yeah, that's my struggle with it too, is there's so much out there, and once D&D Beyond came along, it was like, oh, why am I going to put my efforts into Roll20, because I can just go over to D&D Beyond now. So
Yeah, yeah. And all for us personally, it's just like our play style is like super relaxed and casual, and we've never been very techy, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
adding that stuff, like when I see someone that uses a VTT really well
Hmm.
and Sirenscape, and they've got like all the things going. There is actually a fairly early streamer for D&D, and it was like it was Timmy TV over on Twitch,
Hmm.
and he was like a fantastic GM. And when I would watch him run these games, and a game I played in, it was like watching a conductor with an orchestra. It was so
Hmm.
good. I was always sad that he didn't get a bigger following for what he was doing, because he was doing such a great job with it. But seeing that, as a player, I was like, oh, this is awesome. But as a DM, I'm like, I don't want to do all of that. Like, I just want to
Right.
play the game.
It's hard enough just to keep the game organized and your players corralled.
Yeah.
Running that stuff. There are some people though. I've run some. I played in a game over on Games Tavern where they actually had their GM running the game, but they had a producer behind the scenes that was running their sound effects and a lot of that other stuff for them. So, and they're running that as a production like that. That's how they.
Yeah.
And I think some of their people might have worked in TV or something. I'm not sure, but it felt like I was working with producers that actually knew. Not Dwight, the producer that's just figured stuff out on the fly, but people that have actually been trained in how to produce,
So
things like that. So
we had War Eagle Keep over on Instagram
hmm.
reached out to us after we kind of like finished up our season 1 of Marvel Phase Rip, or season 2, and he kind of came in and acted as in that capacity for us. And
Hmm.
he was someone that actually did do live events, and like that was his business. And so like we weren't using a VTT, but like the overlay, and like you would put up images on the screen like that would correspond with what was going on
Hmm.
in the game, and would use sound effects and stuff like that. So which is pretty cool. But also like it was more like outward facing than inward, as far
Right.
as like the
Hmm.
stuff that was happening. So it's like more like for the people viewing it.
Hmm.
So there's definitely some cool, like, innovative things that can be done with that, especially like you said. And it was great because like they weren't in the game, they weren't a player, they weren't the GM, they didn't have to
Hmm.
worry about coordinating all that stuff at the same time. So
Right.
it's nice for the GM to be able to like just do their
Exactly.
thing.
Yep. Yeah, those are the things I'd like to learn more about them just in an offline game or
Yeah,
a non-streamed game. It's especially when you're producing and DMing. You
yeah,
got 37 balls in the air at once, and I can't imagine adding another 10 to that with some of those things. But if you know them really well, I'm sure it's not that hard to mesh those in. Um, but you've got to know them well. I don't think I wouldn't want to learn that on stream, I guess.
no.
So
I mean, even like just running the kind of low tech game we're running over on this channel,
hmm.
what we just wrapped up, but like I hadn't done much live stuff other than these live chats in a while,
Hmm.
and I hadn't actually run any games for a while. So I was like, you know what? I got an idea. Let's play this system I haven't really run. We'll start a new game, and and I also end up running the production as a
Hmm.
GM as well. So I mean, it is easier when you're the player and you're running production. And the next level obviously is just having someone else do the production.
Right.
Why the game is going on.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're just past the hour mark, so it's that time where we wrap things up. Final thoughts?
No, that was a fast hour. That was I can talk about this all day, but yeah, thank you so much for having me here. So
Yeah, it always goes by pretty fast. As always, folks, in the chat, or not in the chat, but in the description, you can find links to go check Dwight out across the interwebs, as well as after this is over, it'll be pinned in the pinned comment. And until next time, stay nerdy.